So back to our gesture drawing exercises. Go-arounds, we're thinking about the volume of a form. We're actually sort of imagining to the back and up to the front of the form. There's an implied volume. So here we have a sphere, and I'm doing that. I'm imagining go around. And let's say we started to bring in some more of our sensitive lines and solidify this. Here's a line that comes around from behind. It's just going to represent the volume. And around from behind from the bottom, around from behind, around from behind on this side. So you can see where I'm getting this. I'm getting it from that gesture drawing process. I'm going to clean it up a little bit to simplify. So new definition for you. A line like this that follows the structure, the surface of the form, is called a structural line. We don't even need to literally see it on the object in front of us. It's just a line that's mapping or indicating the structure, the surface of the object, a structural line. And I wanted to show you that there can be a close relationship between the cross-hatching and these structural lines. Because I think that's one question that comes to mind, is like, okay, we understand what cross-hatching is, so how do we know which angle the cross-hatches need to go in? And if we start to think about cross-hatching as being similar to these structural lines, or in the gesture studies, the go-around lines, then we can kind of see how maybe they're going to help us create the illusion of roundness. So remember, I had this structural line here, and this is guiding how I start to lay in cross-hatching. And at the same time, I'm thinking about the gesture drawing exercise, how I can come around from behind and express the roundness of this form. The cross-hatching is going around the volume of the form, just like that structural line, or in our gesture studies, the go-arounds. Give it a try in your sketchbook. If at first you can get to this point where you have lines and they're following the surface, the volume of this form, then we're doing really good. Let's give ourselves a goal. We're doing horizontal structural lines, and I want each one to sort of sit properly on the volume of the form. And we'll also try to get a little bit darker towards the outside edge. And that might mean that I'll have more cross-hatching structural lines coming out at the outside edge and fading away. This vertical structural line can also give us sort of a map of how we might do some cross-hatching that again follows the structure of the form. So try to get to this point where you have some horizontals and you have some verticals, and they're staying on the structure's volumetric surface. You guys have been going through this process, so you kind of know how we got here. We did our shoot-throughs, our go-arounds, find the outside edge, and we came back with more sensitive line work. And I can still see a few go-arounds. And now I'm going to start bringing in some structural lines onto this object. And here's where you guys have some creative license, especially when it comes to where you place them and how many structural lines to incorporate into the drawing, and if there's sort of a rhythm or a flow to the structural lines. But I'll tell you two things that I'm sort of looking at. I'm looking for areas where maybe it's flattening out. It's not really telling the whole story. I find that in the real stem, it's really sort of more of an undulation. I also see around the top of the pumpkin, there's a few plane shifts here. So those areas where the plane is shifting, that might also be an area where some more structural lines are going to help tell the story. When we do a drawing, it's good to take a break and step back and look at how effective what we've done is. How did I know to create so many lines? And the answer is I didn't. It's a choice that I made. I felt like this structure is a little bit complex, and that having more lines might give it all more definition. But now that I've stepped back and looked at it for a few minutes, I think it's a bit much. So I'm going back to my kneaded eraser, and again I'm going to make a teardrop with it and use this to just lighten some of these structural lines up again. And like I said before, I made it into a teardrop, and I'm sort of dabbing it on the surface of the paper. I'm sort of doing a dab and a drag just to pick a little bit more up. And also I saw through this area, there's sort of a ridge here that gets struck by light and then sinks into shadow on this side. And I wasn't really capturing that so much here. So I think if I just bring in a little bit of the hatching, that's going to help a lot. And the hatching is just following those structural lines, or it can be almost parallel to the structural lines. I'm going to do a little bit of curved hatching that's almost parallel, just a slightly different angle. So it's crossed over a little bit from structural lines into shading or the cross-hatching. So now I took a minute to step away from the drawing and look at the pumpkin section. And I'm sort of asking myself what's effective, what's not effective. Are the structural lines the right intensity? Are there enough? Are there too little? Too much? Things like that. Are there big areas of the pumpkin that are still feeling really flat? But overall, I'm pretty happy with the way that the structural lines came out. I think it gives a sort of topographical feel to the surface of the object. I would clean up by getting rid of some of those original go-around lines. One thing that I do feel like I want to do though is maybe just in a couple of areas, I feel like there's more of a deeper shadow in these sort of crevices of the pumpkin. So again, I'm going to do a little bit of hatching that sort of follows those structural lines. You've seen me sort of talk about pushing some areas back with a little bit of cross-hatching or shadow, and there's this color theory idea that I've kind of been alluding to but haven't said. There's this idea called the contrast of light and dark. Light values tend to come forward spatially, and dark values tend to recede spatially. So as a last finishing touch, I'm just going to darken this plane, which is supposed to be back behind this. In this color theory idea, contrast of light and dark, that darker values tend to recede spatially. That's going to be a useful and important tool for you